Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moonbeam Monday Lunch and Learn series. My name is Rebekah King, and I am the brain changer, or one of the brain changers from Moonbeam Monday Training and Coaching. And today we're here to learn how to communicate effectively to be understood. So thank you for being here today. I'm looking forward to sharing what is hugely valuable information with you. Now, Moonbeam Monday is made up of me and my business partner, who also happens to be my mum, and she is on screen there today, Rebekah King. Hi, Mum. So just a little bit about why I'm here sharing this information with you. And that is because I spent more than 20 years in the corporate and professional world in a variety of industries. And of course, when I was in it, I could see that there were problems. Of course, there's lots of good things, but I could see that there were problems. But I was always too close to, see what the real problems were. And now that I've stepped away from that environment, I'm going back in a very different capacity to help people in a different way. Because over those years, I've seen that there's three very big issues that just don't seem to go away. And they are that everyone is stressed, people are riddled with anxiety, and that's what I specialize in, helping people eliminate that. And this sense of overwhelm, it's just killing our culture. And when I talk to people personally and professionally, communication often comes up as one of the key players in those three things. So I'm here today to share some key points with you. So we're here to understand that communication isn't a one-size-fits-all, okay? That's what we're here to learn today. We're going to explore how to tailor your message to your audience, whether it's an audience of one or many. We're going to learn about various communication styles, and most importantly, why it's crucial to know what your communication style is. And we're going to discover how to assess the communication gaps, which helps you build stronger connections with colleagues, friends, and family. And so I want to start by asking a question. So hopefully you're able to participate here. If you're eating your lunch, perhaps just pop your fork down for a moment. I want to ask all of you, who thinks they're a good communicator? You can just pop a Y for yes in the chat, or give me a thumbs up. Who thinks they're a good communicator? Sounds like everybody's eating or maybe in the car listening to this. So I'm going to make an assumption and say that many people do feel that they're a good communicator. And I want you to ask yourself, so I won't ask you, if you can participate, please do, but I'll ask you to ask yourself, what makes you such a good communicator? So if you think you're good at communicating, what is it that makes you such a good communicator? And then ask yourself if you've ever been misunderstood. Now, I can answer that question. I have definitely been misunderstood. I have said things or emailed things, and what I was trying to say, I didn't quite get the point across. And for most of us, when we think of communication, we think of communicating an idea, perhaps an inquiry, even a complaint, or communicating instructions. And of course, if we're talking to the workplace space, we're often communicating instructions. And so while this is true, there is much more to it. As I said at the beginning, communication is not a one-size-fits-all. We hear things differently. We all interpret things differently. And one of the reasons this happens is based on the individual experiences that we've had in our lives. Now, those of you who have attended our Mindshift Mastery webinar already will be familiar with this, or in the NLP space will be familiar with this, the filters of the mind. And you can perhaps see our model, Homer Simpson, on the screen there. That's just a snapshot of the filters of the mind. And your brain filters all of the information that comes at you based on your previous experiences. And so it determines whether you're going to delete, distort, or generalize the information. And to give you a little example about that, let's just say somebody says something to me in Italian. I don't speak Italian. I know the basic words. But if somebody says something to me in Italian, my brain is going to filter that information, and it's going to say, I don't understand that. I'm going to delete the information, and I'm going to respond accordingly. But for someone whose first language is Italian, or they've learned it, their brain is going to hear that information and they're going to respond very differently to me. So that's just a very short example of how your mind is filtering that information. So we actually need to constantly adjust our way of communicating if we want to be heard and understood. So you can see already why communication is not a one-size-fits-all thing. And on top of this, communication actually has more to do with listening than it does with talking. Now, you may have heard that already. We were probably told that as kids. And you'd think that communicating with others is easy enough, especially when we're all speaking the same language. But I want you to consider this, and I've got a couple of stats here which I find fascinating. Now, within a business context, research involving 400 UK and US corporations, and this is more than 100,000 employees, showed that an estimated $62.4 billion was lost each year in lost productivity due to communication barriers. So just hear that again, $62.4 billion worth of productivity lost due to problems with communication. So that is huge. Now, if you're listening today or you're watching this recording, you may be thinking, well, I'm in an organization that's a lot smaller than that. But it's all relative, of course. It could still be costing your organization a lot of money. So what does poor communication look like in an organization? So have a think about that for yourself. It could look like missed deadlines. It could look like long wandering emails, those long ones that take a while to get to the point. It could look like poorly planned projects and meetings or lack of feedback. Or it could even be waiting hours or days to get a response to your feedback. These are all examples of poor communication in the workplace. And it's not just relevant in the workplace, of course. In personal relationships, this stat is staggering. Approximately 65% of divorce happens due to communication breakdown. So more than 50%. If we could communicate better with each other, with our partners, breakups may not be so prevalent. And again, what does that look like? What does poor communication look like in a personal relationship? Have a think about that. It might be arguments, criticism of the other person, stonewalling, feeling like you're not heard. So it could be any number of these things. And of course, communication isn't just about communicating with others. It's about communicating with yourself as well. Because if we don't know how to communicate with and understand ourselves, we are actually going to find it difficult to communicate with others effectively. And so I'm even talking about things like, listening to your body. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've perhaps, maybe we've been doing some exercise or perhaps we are ill and we don't yet know it. And our body might be trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us perhaps through pain or a lymph or some sort of reaction. And we need to learn to listen to our body to take appropriate action. Because if we don't listen, then that generally leads to something worse. So communication isn't just about communicating with others. It's about communicating with ourselves, listening to ourselves. So tip number 1 is work out how to communicate with yourself, how to listen to yourself. And also work out how you need to receive information from others. Because the reason that your message may not be getting across or their message may not be getting across to you is that we're communicating in a way that works for us, not actually for the person that we're communicating with. Now, I want you to think about the love languages in this scenario, okay? So most people are familiar with the 5 love languages. We've got quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, gift giving, and acts of service. So we all sit somewhere in a hierarchy there. One is more important than the other. Now, this is relevant in the workplace and personal, If I'm talking to you in the workplace space, let's just remove the awkwardness. We'll take physical touch out of the scenario. But these other ones, they are actually still relevant in the workplace. So, you know, to explain those love languages a little bit better, if I know that my love language, my top love language is quality time, for example, in a personal relationship, I'm going to want to make sure that I receive quality time from a partner. That's most important to me. Or even in the workplace, you know, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm getting quality time from my manager, from my leader. If I don't get that quality time, then that's effectively poor communication. But on the flip side, I might think, well, quality time is important to me, so it must be important to the other person. But they may have a different love language that is higher on their scale. So I need to understand what their love language is so that I can give that back to them. So it's important to understand not only what information and style of communication that's important to you, but also what is important to the person that you're communicating with. So I have a question for you. If you're able to answer in the chat box, and I actually gave you the answer earlier. That's okay, Magda, hello, nice to have you here. What is the most important part of communication? If you can pop the answer in the chat, what do you think is the most important part of communication? Just have a think about that for yourself. And if you're watching the recording, have a think about it. The most important part of communication is listening. And we probably were all told that in primary school. We might have forgotten. Okay? It's listening mindfully. Now, what do we all want when we're communicating with someone? We want to be heard, right? We want to be understood. There's no point in communicating with someone or a bunch of people if we're not going to be heard and understood. And often we can think that just using our words is enough to communicate the point. But in fact, only 7% of our communication comes from the words that we use. Only 7%. And we put so much time and effort into considering our words. But 38% actually comes from the way that we say it, you know, the tonality, the speed, the inflections, the mood, the energy. And that leaves a whopping 55% from our physiology. You know, that's our movements, our hand gestures, our facial expressions. If any of you on the call or watching the recording are familiar with Auslan, sign language, you'll know that facial expressions are a vital part of the language. It's not enough to use the hand gestures. If the facial expressions aren't included, that can often lead to misinterpretation. So it's like one ear is listening to the content to keep you going, but the other ear is listening for those golden nuggets, you know, your points that you need to take away. But what's also happening often is that we're already thinking about what we are going to say in response to what the other person is saying before they've even finished speaking. Who's done that? I've done it. I still do it on occasion. You know, so somebody's talking, somebody's sharing something with me, and I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say in return. So what is the purpose of mindful listening? It is to silence the internal noise of your own thoughts so that you can hear the whole message, so that the speaker feels understood. Because that's what we want when we communicate, isn't it? We want to be heard, we want to be understood. And it's a way of listening without judgment, without criticism, and without interruption. Because when we do these three things, when we judge, when we criticize, even if it's in our head, and when we interrupt, we are not communicating effectively. It's one of my pet hates is that interruption. You know, you're in the middle of a conversation with someone and they just blurt something out. Often it's not even related. And you think, what? Clearly, I'm not being heard because their mind is wandering. So you're all aware of mindfulness, I'm sure. It's a big buzzword. We've all heard it. But what does being mindful actually encourage you to do? Mindfulness is encouraging you to be present. Yes? Being present in the moment, removing distractions or letting go of distractions. Because when you're not mindful, you could be distracted by your own thoughts and worries, and you can really fail to see and hear what the other person or people are doing or saying. So there are a number of ways that you can do mindful listening, and these are just some of them. So it's about removing distractions. So if you're in the workplace, and as so many of us are in open spaces these days, it's about removing distractions. Okay, so phones, of course, are number one. They're our number one distraction. Smartwatches, or turning the notifications off. I can tell you, in a workplace, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, it's time to get rid of the smartwatch, or at least leave it at the desk and leave your phone at the desk when you take an employee in for a meeting. I had a manager who was addicted to their smartwatch, and any time that we were in a meeting, I just didn't feel that our time was valued by them because they were constantly distracted by their watch. So mindfully listening, remove distractions. It might even be other people. So if you are in an open plan office, it might be about going into another room with that person that you want to communicate with. Give yourself time. So just give yourself a moment to clear your head before you meet with someone, whether it be on Zoom, whether it be face-to-face. Just give yourself a moment to clear your mind. Say, I'm going to leave that to-do list behind for now because I want to focus on this particular person. I want to be mindful. Learn to cultivate empathy, understanding someone else's point of view. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. Okay, it's simply about being there for them, hearing them, listening to them. And lastly, it could be as simple as pausing before you speak. Like I was saying before, we're all in such a hurry to respond and to give our point of view. Taking just a simple breath or a pause before you respond could actually change the whole conversation. So they're just a couple of ideas and how-tos, how to do mindful listening. Listening being the most important part of communication. Okay, so I said that we would learn about various communication styles and why knowing your own style is crucial. So I want to introduce you to the representational systems. Now, one of the fundamental ways we can improve the way that we communicate with others is to understand how individuals process information. And this happens in 4 distinct ways. And I'm hoping you can still see my screen. If you can't see visual, auditory, kinesthetic, etc., please let me know. But these are the 4 distinct ways that individuals process information. So visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. And you can see these percentages on the side here. Approximately, on average, 60% of people identify as being visual, 20% auditory, and 20% kinesthetic. Now, there's no percentage here at auditory digital because the AD is typically made up of a bit of all of the others. And this is the way that we represent the world through our 5 senses. So when information reaches our brain, it's assigned a meaning and it forms a subjective experience of our world. And so in other words, it's how we individually perceive things. And although we do typically use all 4 of these representational systems, we usually favor one of them, just like we might favor a particular type of food. So we might eat all sorts of different foods, but we might typically go for one in particular. It's the same with the representational systems. So before I take you through some of the characteristics, I'd like to get a sense of what you think you are. And if you're happy to share that in the chat, or even just have a think about it, where do you think you sit within these 4? Are you more of a visual person? Do you like to see it? And drop it in the chat if you can. Do you like to see things? Or are you more auditory? Do you like to hear things? Magda, you think you're more of a kinesthetic person. You really like to feel things. And then there's AD, which is auditory digital. This is more that inner dialogue, that self-talk. So you might have had to think and you know, where you think you sit on this scale. I am very much a visual person. Now, you might look at all of these and go, oh, Beck, I think I sit in all 4 of these, which of course you do. As I said, we all take a little bit from all of these. Brooke, kinesthetic and visual. Okay, excellent. But of course, we've got a tool a bit later on that's going to help you determine exactly where you sit. So let me go through some of the characteristics of these, and this might help you redefine what you think you are. So I won't go through all of them in detail, but a visual person typically does things quite quickly. You know, picture means 1,000 words to a visual person. They're quite shallow breathers, so they're not the belly breathers, right? They're breathing more up from the chest up here. And they use a lot of hand gestures. So you can probably see my hands. I'm actually trying to keep them in my lap. But they typically use hand gestures and they're higher up here. Typically, they have a neat, organized and well-groomed appearance. And they use words like, I get the picture, or I see what you mean, or I see what you're saying. So they're using visual words. And they are less distracted by noise. So that's a typically visual person. Then we've got auditory. So auditory people tend to do things more rhythmically. So that makes sense if you think about music. Music has a rhythm to it. We listen to music. So auditory people tend to be more rhythmic. They talk to themselves, not in a strange way, but perhaps when they're reading, they might move their lips a little bit more. Auditory people can repeat instructions back easily. So if I am giving instructions to an auditory person, if I simply tell them the instructions, they can generally repeat them straight back to me or just go and action that. They are easily distracted by noise. So you might find that if you're in a crowded room, they're going to find it hard to concentrate just on you because they're being distracted. They're hearing everything around them. It's not that they're eavesdropping. It's just that's their primary sense. They're very good at memorizing in steps or a sequence. So again, if I give instructions, 1, 2, 3, 4, they hear that. They're very good at then following those instructions in that sequence. And they're going to use hearing words like, I hear what you're saying, or that rings a bell, or that clicks, because it's a sound word. Kinesthetic people. So a couple of you here. So they're typically those deeper breathers, from the bottom of their lungs. They are slower at doing things than a visual person. Okay, so it doesn't mean that they're slow. It just means that they move at a slower pace because they really need to feel the information coming at them. They might take long pauses between statements. It's not because they haven't heard you, but it's because they are processing, the information that they've just heard. They really need to feel it inside their body. Of course, they respond well to physical rewards, to touch and physical rewards. And they say things like, I want to get a handle on it, or that provides a firm foundation. So they're really grounded type words. They're tangible. And they memorize best by walking through a process. So these are the types of people that are going to learn best when they actually do it. Then we've got auditory digital. Now, this does manifest characteristics from all 3 of the other representational systems. But these people, these are the logical people, okay? They want to make sense of things and really understand them. Detail is important to these people, okay? So if you are sharing information with this person, make sure you've got the detail because they need the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and they want to make sense of it. They're going to say things like, I understand, or that computes with me, or I understand that motivation, or words like consider. So they're really processing this information. So why is it important to know this? Well, as I said at the beginning, we want to learn how to tailor the message to suit the audience. And there are two important things to know here. And firstly, it's important to know how you need to receive information so that you can share this information with others. So, understanding, let's put this in a workplace context, perhaps for an example. If you're getting instructions from someone on how to do something, let's say you've got a new CRM to learn, knowing what representational system is your primary is information you can use to help the person training you. So if they're just sitting there telling you how to use this new CRM and you're a visual person, you could say to them, actually, do you know what would be really helpful to me is perhaps you could write these steps up on the board or give it to me in written instructions, and then I can see the instructions and I can follow these. Or if you're a more kinesthetic type person and you're learning this new CRM, you might say to your trainer, look, I really learn best when I do it. So could we sit side by side and you give me the instructions, but then I actually go and do it. So I'll open the CRM, I'll log in, I'll click on that button, because you're going to retain the information. You're going to hear it and retain the information better when you go through step by step. So that's how you can use this information to, help others in communicating with you. So number one, letting others know how best to communicate with you so that they are heard and understood. Okay, because communication, it's actually not so much about us, it's about the other person and helping them. And there are a few tips and tricks that you can use to understand how someone else needs to receive information from you. So you might know where you sit on this scale, but what are some tips and tricks to understand what somebody else is? So here's a few things to look or listen for. So what words do they use? I gave you a few hints before, but a visual person, they might say, oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you mean. I can picture that. An auditory person is going to use sound words. A kinesthetic person is going to use feeling words or, tangible words. So you can actually start taking note of the types of words that they use to give you a hint as to where they sit here. Where do they look? Now, a visual person typically looks up to either side, and either side does mean something different, which we're not going to go into today, but a visual person will look up. An auditory person might look side to side. A kinesthetic person is typically going to look down when they're thinking. So you can start using their eye movements as a bit of a clue as to where they sit in the representational scale. What pace do they speak at? I mentioned that visual people are typically faster talkers, whereas a kinesthetic person might talk a little slower and pause between the points. So that's going to give you a clue. And do they respond rapidly or do they pause before talking? So again, a visual person or an auditory person might speak more rapidly than a kinesthetic or an auditory digital person. So these are just all clues, and you can adjust how you're communicating with someone based on these clues. And when you know this, you can tailor your information to suit their communication style. Now, you might be wondering how you figure out what you are. And Magda, I know you've already done this exercise. This is for you, Brooke, and anybody else watching the recording. We actually have a tool called the Representational System Analysis that you can download on our website. And what it is, it looks like the sheet that you can see there, except it's an Excel spreadsheet when you download it. It's full of formulas. So there's 10 questions there that you go and answer, and you grade them based on what you see, think, feel, or hear. And when you've answered all of those questions, you go to the next tab, the results tab, and it spits out the percentages of where you sit with all of the representational systems. So some of you might find that you're quite even between them. And some of you will find that one is a lot higher than another. And that will give you an indication of whether you're more visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or auditory digital. And then you can use that information to your benefit. So all you need to do is go to our website, which is moonbeammonday.com.au, and you go to the resources tab, the free resources, and it's the first one on that page. You'll see it, representational system analysis. And once you've done it, we'd love to hear from you, hear what you, if you actually were what you thought you were. It's always interesting to see. And now that you know some of those characteristics, I wonder if you still think you sit where you thought in the first place, if that makes sense. Okay, so I want to move on to the next part of communication. So let me ask you a question here. So for those of you on the line, what is our most basic need as a human? So if you want to type it in the chat, if you're able to, what is our most basic need? To be seen and heard. Absolutely, that is super important. Connection, yes. And of course, it's going to be different for everyone, isn't it? Safety, of course, is hugely important. And both of those things, to be seen and heard, to feel safe, to have connection, to feel safe, to be in our tribe, it can all boil down to safety. So our most basic need is to feel safe, to be seen and heard, to feel connected. And when people are like each other, they like each other and they feel safe, right? So if you think about your friends, the people that you choose to spend time with, you're probably all alike, right? Or you've got a lot of similarities. You're like each other, therefore you like each other because you feel safe. So we're talking about rapport here, and the best way to build rapport is to help people feel safe when you're speaking with them or when they're talking to you. And you can do this by helping them feel comfortable. Like you said, Magda, help them feel seen and heard. And Brooke, like you said, help them feel connected. And there are two primary ways in which people gain rapport, and that is matching and mirroring. So matching can be as simple as altering the way that you speak, what you say, how you say it, even how you breathe and how you blink, the hand gestures that you use, and the way that you move your body. Because by doing this, you become like the other person, and then they in turn feel like they're with someone similar to themselves. You know, they're moving the same way as me. They're using facial expressions like I do. You know, they're breathing at the same pace as me. You know, I'm not all like breathing fast and they're really slow and calm. Okay, so we can actually use these things and adjust them to help somebody feel safe. And when you do this and they feel safe, they're more likely to communicate freely with you. And when we match these physical actions, like I said, the gestures, the blinking, the breathing, the facial expressions, what it's doing is it's actually sending a message to our unconscious mind that we are like them. So you're essentially tailoring not only what you're saying to them, but how you're saying it. And if you remember back to that stat at the beginning, only 7% of what we say is our words. You know, it's that tonality and that physiology being the most, that 55% of our communication. Now, I just want to make a point here and say it's important to understand that we're not talking about mimicking somebody, okay? Because of course that can come across as making fun or being rude. So we're not talking about mimicking, we're talking about matching. There is a difference. And ultimately it is important to adapt your behavior appropriately so that what you communicate is actually received the way that you desire. So you know the outcome you want to get from communicating to people, so you can adapt your communication style to get that outcome. And then another way to build rapport is to mirror. Now you can actually see a couple of pictures on the slide. The first one, you can see a man and a woman. They're sitting across the table from each other. They've both got one hand on their coffee and the other hand, you know, sort of resting on the table. So it's like they're looking in a mirror. And of course, unconsciously, each of them are looking at each other thinking, they're doing exactly what I'm doing. They look like me. They're the same as me. I feel safe. I'm being heard here. I'm connected. And then you can see Obama below with, I always forget his name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not important who they are, but you can see that if they turn to face each other, that they would be mirroring each other down to what they're wearing. So I think this is fairly standard in politics, a fairly standard uniform. You can see even the tie is a similar color in this one, but one or the other, who knows who's done it first, but one of them has taken their jacket off and put it over. Thank you, David Cameron. Thanks, Mum. One of them has taken their jacket off and flung it over the shoulder. And then the other one has done it afterward. It's an assumption they've done it afterward, and they're mirroring them. So you can see if they turn to each other, they would be mirroring them. Obama, I have read that Obama uses this tool a lot to build rapport with people. He is actually very familiar with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is the technique that we use in our coaching. So that is mirroring. So we are coming toward the end. And we want to embed today's learnings, because the sooner that you put this into practice, the better you're going to remember what you've learned today. So what you can take away from today, we've learned how to communicate effectively. Well, when you learn how to communicate effectively with yourself, you'll become a more effective communicator with others. So if you currently don't listen to yourself, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your body, how can you expect to communicate effectively with others if you won't listen to yourself? Be mindful when you are listening, not only with yourself, but with others. So we had those tips. Remove distractions. Give yourself a moment to focus and be there for the other person. And if that means just taking a moment to breathe before you walk into a room, it can be a mere second. Then do that. You've learned that there are 4 distinct ways of communicating, giving and receiving. So that's the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. So you've probably now got an idea of where you fit into which one of those, which is your more primary representational system. And you've got some tips on how to identify someone else's preferred style of communication. So now when you start listening to other people, see if you can pick up some of the words that they're using, or where they're looking, or the pace that they're talking about. And that's going to give you a clue about where they sit in the representational system. And you've learned 2 very simple ways of building rapport and making the other person feel safe, which is our basic need as a human. Matching and mirroring, matching pace, hand gestures, facial expressions, and mirroring them. And that has just been a taster. We could run a full day workshop on communication and it probably still wouldn't be enough, because knowing how to communicate effectively, both giving and receiving information, can be absolutely life-changing. If you think back to those stats at the beginning, what it's costing organizations, poor communication. It could cost you a relationship, whether that be with a partner, a child, a parent, a friend. And nailing communication could save millions of dollars in an organization, or it could save a relationship. And there are so many other areas that contribute to a happy, healthy, and productive life, both personally and professionally. And if you'd like to know more, you can check out our 2-day immersive workshop that we're running in November. It really takes you on a deep dive into doing the work to change your life, or to simply make some tweaks. It's not always about making massive changes. It's just about making tweaks to get the results that you want sometimes. And this is for you individually, or if you're a leader in a team or a manager in a team, for somebody in your team who you need some support in their life. So this is what it is. It's the brain changer. And it helps you understand what's driving your unconscious mind what you say, do, and think, why you do that. It helps you discover easy ways to get the results that you want, rather than just letting things play out or getting the results you don't want. And you create real and lasting change by retraining your brain, because everything that we do is training our brain in a certain way. But it doesn't mean that that's it. We can actually retrain our brain to think, say, and do exactly what we want it to. So we make real-time changes in the room, and it's a completely safe space with like-minded people. It's a very small group. And the best part is that you leave with this practical toolkit that you can use for the rest of your life. And there are even tools that you can share with loved ones at home or even with colleagues in the workplace. And so anyone on this call today or anyone watching the recording who books for our November workshop, off the top of my head, I'm going to say it's the 16th and 17th of November. It's a Thursday and a Friday. You can actually access the early bird price, which is over for anyone that goes onto our website. But anyone who's watching the call today or the recording can use the code that's on the screen there, BrainChanger1, and get the early bird price, which gives you $400 off the price of it. You're welcome. So that is all for today. We hope you have enjoyed our Moonbeam Monday Lunch and Learn session today, all about communicating effectively to be heard. We are running these every fortnight with a different topic, so be sure to register for the next one. Come along with your appetite to learn. Next fortnight, we'll be talking about the function of the brain and the neuroscience behind behavior change, but we're going to be doing it without the sciencey speak, okay, in layman terms, I guess is the best way to say that. So we will stick around for a few minutes. I'll just take that off share screen. We will stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to come off mute, turn their camera on and ask any questions or just give comments. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. And bye for now.